Mr. Swinford, where were you born?
In Filkins in 1887. My father was born in Filkins too, and his father and great-grandfather. They originated from Chalford in Gloucestershire, and I think there is quite a few of the Swinfords still living there now. Well, my father said if he got a job for me on the building, would I like to go? And I said yes, I should. I'd rather go on the building than any other job. So he got a job for me at Shilton. And I used to walk from Filkins to Shilton and get there by 7 and work till 6 o'clock at night, and then walk home. The journey about 3.5 miles each way. This I had 6 shillings a week for. Mm-hmm. Then after that, the big job started at East Leach, a place called Ravens Hill, where Sir Thomas Basley now lives. We got a job there. We had to get there at 6 o'clock in the morning and work till 8 at night. And my job then was carrying the odd all day long, 12 hours a day, and 6 hours on Saturday, which was 66 hours a week. That was 11 shillings a week for me because I had twopence an hour. Mm-hmm. Then we was there for about 18 months, and then of course I begun to get to know about building. I started stone walling. The foreman said to me one day, he said, "Now then, George, it's about time you started doing a bit of walling. Get a hammer and trowel and go up there and start." So I went up, and I remember I started walling inside. Stones were used inside then, not bricks or concrete blocks as they use today. It was all stone walling inside and out. Well, that's where I started my walling. Of course, stone walling is almost a lost art, because we had to know how to do this stone walling well, because the only material we had to go with the stones was just lime and dirt. Not even sand was used in those days, and of course if it wasn't filled in well, the middle well filled in and well hammered down, this was a failure. And of course the field walls, they have no mortar, they call them dry walls, and they're just built of the stone. This job, of course, is a art, because the way to make a strong wall is to get bonders in, which go across the wall, and the middle to be well filled, and wherever you can, to get a big one in the middle as well as on the outside. This makes the strength of the wall. We have done a good bit of this in my time, but of course it's a job that years ago masons used to get so much of this walling on hand, especially for the bad weather when they couldn't build houses. And that was a job in the winter to fall back on when they couldn't go on with mortar work.
Now, the selection of stone, and how do you get your stone? Did you sort of get it from a local quarry yourself? Do you own quarries, or did your father own quarries? How do you get the stone to build?
In the first place, of course, before you could build in these stone walls, you had to get the stone. Now, when I was a boy, there was gangs went about around this district, what they called stone diggers. And the quarries were all over the place, in all the fields. You could still see the hollows where these stones were dug. Of course, in those days, these local stones were used on the roads. So when they dug the stones, they were put out in stacks for building houses. That was the thicker ones, and the thinner ones for dry walling, and the rough stones was used for the roads. 5 shillings a yard was the price of the best stone, and the road stones were generally sold for about a shilling a yard, and the dry stone was about 18 pence a yard. Now, stone digging for the roads, the councils used to put up notices asking for tenders to dig stones in certain quarries for the roads. Now, these prices, of course, were sent in, and then the smallest estimate was generally accepted. Well, these stone diggers was generally glad of the job in the winter when harvesting and hay making and all was done. So the prices sent in was cut prices, and the last price that was sent in, I remember, was sixpence farthing a yard. To dig, that was to top, dig and stack. They had to stack them in yards. 10 by 10 was 100 yards a stack, and they used to dig them at sixpence farthing a yard, and I think that was the last time that they were dug piecework. And then, of course, what happened, it was such a price that the job wasn't worth having. And then it fell through, and then of course we began to get the hard stone from Bristol and other places, and the steamroller came about.
What date would that be, roughly?
Well, that was about 1902 or 4, something like that, when the last lot of stones was dug locally for the roads.
Now, those days were described, and are described still by people, as the good old days. What views you got on the good old days?
Well, of course, it was good old days for some people, but it wasn't very good old days for the workers. Of course, if we had a job, we had to work very, very hard to keep that job. And if you didn't work very hard, well, of course, you got the sack, and there was soon from somebody else there to take your job on. Our food consisted of mostly bacon and vegetables, potatoes, swedes, cabbage, all those kind of things we used to have. Fresh meat was very, very scarce in our house. I remember we used to have just one joint at Whitsuntide, Filkins Club time, and perhaps we might have a piece of beef at Christmas. Otherwise, all the rest of the year we lived on bacon, fried bacon, boiled bacon. That was our main diet.
You were talking or mentioned about Filkins Club. Now, what were these country clubs that existed years ago?
Well, these village clubs, benefit societies I used to call them, they were used especially for people to join in these clubs for their own benefit if they were ill. They used to pay at Filkins sixpence a week, 2 shillings for 4 weeks. Every 4 weeks they had a club night and paid their money. Well, if a man was ill, he received 10 shillings a week for, I think it was about 6 months. And then after that he went on half pay and had 5 shillings a week, as long as he was ill. Well, every Whit Tuesday they had a big day. They had the band. The band used to arrive about 9 o'clock and play into the village to the Bull or the Lamb Inn where the club was held. Then, of course, there was lunch, bread and cheese and beer. They used to issue out cups, and then the stewards or the committee used to run around with water cans full of beer and give them plenty of beer. And then by about 10:30, all the members congregated just in the field. The band was ready out in the street, and then as their names was called out, they paid sixpence in one plate and twopence on the other. The sixpence was for the secretary, to pay the secretary, and the twopence was to pay the cooks for cooking the big dinner they was having. Then they marched to church with a flag flying and the band in front and all the members with their rosettes up in their coats. And then at 12 o'clock they came out and had some more beer and got ready for a big lunch at 1 o'clock. This was a day looked forward to by a good many, as it was a day when the sons came home from a long way off. I remember quite a lot went from the village to South Wales to work in the coal pits. And that was the day and the only day in the year that they came home to see their parents. Then, of course, they had this big dinner, and the vicar, of course, he got up and made a speech, and the doctor, he made a speech, And after every one made their speech, the band played "He's a Jolly Good Fellow." And then at the end of the meal, the national anthem was played, and they all walked off, and the band went round the village to all the houses, played, and the stewards made a collection for the benefit of the club.
Now, you say you had a village band. Was that the only form of music, perhaps?
Well, in those days we had a very good choir in the church, and we also had a brass band. The brass band was a temperance band. It was called once a temperance band, and then it was called the Primitive Methodist Band, and it was run by the chapel people mostly. And this band, of course, didn't go to dances and places like that, but nearly every Sunday through the summer, the band went out to camp meetings all around the district. I was in the band for 22 years, and we had some very good times. But I'm sorry to say that these village bands seem to be gone now.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, though, that was a form of music. Were there any forms, shall we say, of traditional country music, such as concertina players, perhaps, fiddlers, or even folk singers that you knew of or can recall?
Well, in our village, the old people, they all had their special song to sing. And these used to be sung in the public houses mostly in the evenings, and of course they're not allowed now to sing these songs in pubs, so they seem to be dying out.
Now, you say they're special songs. What sort of special songs? Can you remember any of them at all?
Well, of course, I remember the names of them, about the Dagotel gypsies and songs like that. I have got a book written of these songs, and a lot of the people's names, village people's names, are in this book who sung these songs. But unfortunately, they didn't get the music to them, only just the words.
You've got no personal recollection of the music yourself?
No, anyone starts singing them, I should remember them, but I couldn't sing them myself.
No. Do you have a personal memory of any school songs or anything like that?
Yes, I remember a song that we learnt 70 years ago. I was just about 5 then, I suppose. And I remember 2 years ago we went to Weston-super-Mare, a little outing, the village people. And there were several children on the coach, and they were singing these old village songs. And it suddenly came to me about an old song that we learned at school when I was about 5. I thought, well, I wonder if I could sing that song. So anyway, I thought myself, well, I'd try and sing it to these children, so I did. And this is how it went. As Tommy was walking one fine summer's day, some rosy-cheeked apples I saw on his way. He saw on his way, he saw on his way, some rosy-cheeked apples he saw on his way. These rosy-cheeked apples so pretty to see, they seem to say, Tommy, come climb up for me, come climb up for me. Come climb up for me, they seem to say, Tommy, come climb up for me. The bough it did break, and poor Tommy did fall, and down came the apples, poor Tommy and all, Tommy and all, Tommy and all. Down came the apples, poor Tommy and all. When Tommy got up he felt very sore, and promised he'd never steal apples no more, apples no more, apples no more, and he promised he'd never steal apples no more. Well, when I started work, of course we, especially on the buildings, we were digging about different places like foundations and drains and levelling ground, and we used to dig up odds and ends, And I think my first recollection of interest was we dug up a piece of old china. It was a very nice piece. We had some at home, the same kind, and I heard my father and mother saying that was some valuable old china. So I said, I'd try and find the other piece of this portion that I had got, but I never found it, and I feel that was the real start of collecting. From then, I was always on the lookout for finding things and finding out what it was and what it was used for and the names of it. I used to talk to the old people quite a lot and get information from them, and they always seemed eager to tell me, which was a great thing and a great help. From then onward, I began to collect things, and I always seemed interested in the heart of the thing, which the beauty, like ironwork and stonework, anything of that kind that was made well. Yes, I had an eye for beauty and craftsmanship, and that's what I always looked for. And I always felt I could see the old men making these things, or their wives and other people using them, which was sort of a very interesting thing and helped me a great deal.
Did you actually originally keep these things yourself or not?
No, anything of any value I used to give to Mr. Groves. I worked for Mr. Groves, the builders, at Milton under Wychwood for a good many years, and he used to collect, and I used to let him have these things when I found anything interesting. I always let him have it, so I never kept it then, not myself.
No. What was the first thing then you did keep?
Well,
And when was it, incidentally?
I went to work for Sir Stafford Krips in 1925, and as his state foreman, and we done a lot of building and digging about, as the old house where he lived, Goodfellows Filkins, was an old moated house, and we dug some foundations, and we dug across a portion of the old moat that had been filled in. And there we found a very old door key. We sent it to the British Museum, and they dated it at 1580. Well, that was the first thing. And then as we went on digging there, we found the skeleton of a donkey with a shoe, one shoe. And those two articles were the first two things that we really saved. Well, as we went on, we began to find different things in ironwork and bronze and coins and different things. These I put on a shelf in the workshop. And of course, Sir Stafford Krips, when he came on weekends, he used to come and say, "Well, George, have you found anything else this week?" And I would let him see what we had. Well, time went on, and we filled this shelf full of articles, and as soon as he got home a weekend, he used to come straight to me and say, "Well, what have you found this week?" And I've told him like what we had, and he said, "Well, we'd ought to get a museum, and if you see a building suitable in the village any time for sale, let me know, and we'll try and buy it, and then you can have a museum." Well, a building which we have now was for sale. It had been used as a bicycle shop. It was for sale, and I told Sir Stafford about it, and he bought it, and he said, "Well, there you are, there's your museum." And so he handed this building over to me as a museum, and he helped make the cases in there.
Himself?
Himself, yes. And
when you say he helped make the cases, what sort of work did he do, just for curiosity?
He made the woodwork and put the glass in. I gave him the instructions what to do and the sizes, and when he was on his holidays, that's what he done. He made the cases and fixed the glass and made them to the sizes to suit the building.
Do you think he enjoyed doing that?
Yes, he did enjoy doing this very much, and he was very keen on coming down weekends and spend his holidays in my workshop.
Tell me, what was your impression of Sir Stafford Krips as a man? You must have known him in a way quite personally, didn't you?
Yes, I knew Sir Stafford Krips very well. I'll say this, that he was the greatest man I ever worked under, and in fact knew. He, uh, he was genuine. What he said he meant. He would not take anybody's side if there was any trouble. I know sometimes, of course, on these estates there is a bit of trouble. He'd never listen to one alone. He always said, well, you two come to my house, come in the house and we'll have this over. And I found him very, very straightforward over everything.
Can you remember anything else about Sir Stafford?
Well, he was very kind, and one thing he'd done for me, he came along to my house, which I restored. When we started on the job, I said to him, what shall I do with this old property? And he said, well, no, you do just what you think best. I'll leave it to you. Make it make it like a house that you'd like to live in yourself. So I told him what I thought about doing, and he said, yes, all right, everything is all right. So when it was finished, he said to me, would you like to live in this house, George? I said, yes, I should. And your wife? I said, yes, she'd like to come down here. So he said, well, you can come. So in 1932, we came down here to live. On Christmas morning, 32, he came along, as he always did, on Christmas morning, and said, now, George, I've got a little present for you. And he gave me a roll of papers, and this was a present, giving me the house as long as I lived, rent-free, and I still have it.
It was a lovely Christmas box.
Yes, it was a very nice Christmas box. That's the kind of man he was. We built 4 cottages in Rose's Lane, and when these were finished, Mr. Greenwood, who was the Ministry of Health at that time, he came and opened them. There were several more these labour men, such as George Lansbury and Mr. Morrison, who was Minister of Transport at that time, and we arranged to have our museum open for the first time on that day. And Mr. Herbert Morrison, he was the first to sign the book in the museum. We didn't have an official opening, but he was the first to come and sign his name.
Now, Mr. Swinford, there must be many famous people, by the sound of it, that you've met in your time.
Yes, of course, when I worked for Sir Stafford Krips, a lot of noted people used to come down to Goodfellas here where he lived, and he entertained them for the weekend. Very often they held conferences down there. Well, when these people used to come, he used to say to me, George, I've got so-and-so coming today, and I'll bring them along and have a little chat with you. Well, of course, these people were, as I say, noted people. George Lansbury, Major Attlee then, and Morrison, and a lot more Labour Member of Parliament used to come down here, and they all came along here and had a little chat with me. One weekend, Pandit Nehru came down here, and Sir Stafford said to me on the Saturday morning, George, I've got Pandit Nehru coming down here. Would you like to have a chat with him? Could you get some of your pals and get them to come and meet him along at your house and have a chat with him this afternoon? So I said, yes, we should be very pleased to do that. So I saw several men that I thought might be interested and asked them to come down. And I expect I got about 7 or 8 of us down here, and Pandit Nehru and his friends came with him. And I sat in our house, where we are now, in this little room, and we had quite a long talk. Well, two things I do remember I asked him was my son, who was in the Air Force in India for about 3 years, he passed an examination whilst he was out there and entitled him to more pay. Well, he could never get this pay put on his records, so he never received it while he was out there. After he got home, he made an application for it, and he got it in all his back pay. So I said, well, why wasn't this done in India? And he said, well, the question is that in the offices in India, most of the civil servants that are doing all this work are Indians, and they will not put anything on the records which they have to pay. And I said, they have to pay? And he said, yes. As soon as a soldier leaves Southampton, he's on the Indian pay books, either a airman or a soldier or anything of that sort. They're on the Indian pay books. Mm-hmm. So this question I put to Pandit Nehru. I said, is that right that the Indians have to pay our armies whilst they're in occupation? He said, oh yes, as soon as they leave Southampton docks, they're on our pay books and the Indian people have to pay them. Mm-hmm. Well, Pandit Nehru seemed a very nice man, and he talked English as well as the best English could be spoken, I should think. And his colour was very, very little different to we ourselves. He was just a little darker. He was very thin in the face, I remember, and he had dark hair then. And of course he had two more Indians with him. But the questions we asked him and that he seemed ready to answer, and told us quite a lot of things that we were surprised to hear from him.
Did he ask you any questions?
Well, we'll put it like this. I asked him what he thought of the British workman, and he said, you are the most ignorant people that I've ever met, because you could have the things that you want because you have the opportunity, or you have to vote the proper way and you can have these things that you've been wanting, but you're so ignorant that you don't seem to realise that.
Mm. Tell me, George Lansbury was another famous gentleman who came actually to your house here?
Yes, he visited my house a good many times, and I always received a Christmas card from him every year as long as he lived. He was a fine old gentleman, and I used to go out with little walks with him up the road, and he talked mostly of the conditions of the workers and their families. That's what he seemed most interested in, to try and get better conditions for the workers. That was his sole thoughts, and we went out for these little walks with him. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, I have always been that way inclined on the Labour side. My father and all my relations, I think, have always been trying to get better conditions for the workers, and of course we've had to suffer sometimes through doing that. But Mr. Lansbury...
When you say that, that interests me. When you say you had to suffer for doing that, was that back in the old days when you sort of stood up for your rights?
Yes, very often if you didn't vote the same way as the squire or the farmer, or the leading farmer in the village, we had to suffer in some way or other. Such things as, well, we never received any charities in the village. We never expected it, but we never received it either. And if there was anything to be given away, we never had anything of that sort. And another thing, of course, when you asked for a job, and there was two of you after the same job, generally the one that was in favour, the same as the squire, he generally got the job, and otherwise you didn't. But my father was very, very independent and always stuck out for his rights, and he didn't mind the squire knowing who he was going to vote for or anything of that kind. He always open about it.
Hmm. And therefore became unpopular, I suppose.
And then, of course, in their eyes, he was unpopular.
Bit of a rebel.
Yes, what they called a rebel in those days. Yes.
Yes.
Well, of course, in our village, we had the club, as we've talked about, and we also had a feast. Our Filkins feast came on the following Sunday, the first Sunday after the 11th of October, Michaelmas Day. Now this Filkins feast generally came just after the 11th, when the Michaelmas people, or the farm labourers, used to move, and that was the first time we saw them. These new people that came into the village at Michaelmas, they generally came down to the feast, and that's the first time we saw all the new people, and we looked out for them, people that came to this farm and that farm, and of course we liked to meet them and see what they were like. But of course years ago they used to bait the bull at Filkins feast day, and that was quite a big day.
What happened then?
Well, they used to bait the bull. You see, roast the bull on the spit on the green at Filkins, and I should think about the last time that was done was in the middle of the last century. You've got a history that old Thomas Bantin wrote, and he mentioned the time that the last bull was baited at Filkins feast, and I should think it was somewhere about the middle of last century.
Mm-hmm. Now, your museum is principally a folklore museum, is that correct?
Yes.
What sort of things you actually got in there, which shall we say are rare?
Well, of course, in the museum I have a good many, I'd say, pretty well 2,000 articles now, and the things that I do like to collect is the old domestic things, such as cooking utensils, the old candlesticks and the lighting equipment, the old pottery that they used. I've got a very good collection of that, and all those kinds of things that they were using at that time in the house, domestic things. I'm very fond of those things. Then, of course, I am very fond of the old tools. Masons, carpenters, wheelwrights, hurdle makers, all these old tools I have been collecting. I've got quite a good collection now, and of course the farm labourers' tools that were used in the old days, such as sickles, old ploughshares when the wooden plough was used, different forks used in the fields for hay making and harvesting, lots of the old flail, the old breast ploughs, all those kind of things I like to collect and preserve.
Yes. And what is going to be the future, do you think, of your museum? Is anybody else going to take it on?
Well, about that, of course, I'm getting on now in years, and what'll happen to it, I'm not quite sure. But I've had a gentleman down from Oxford who has been employed to try and arrange a new city and county museum. He's had a look over my things that I have, and whether these will go into that museum or not, I'm not quite sure. But as Mr. John Krips have a voice in this museum, I cannot say myself exactly what will happen to them. But anyway, I do hope somebody will preserve them and look after them.
So do I. I'm sure they will, because there's a valued treasure chest, that
Yes.
museum of yours.